Hey everyone, welcome to a quick feature preview of the new character animation features for NeoFPS 1.2 and the AI systems that are coming with that. They are a bit of a beast, and I hadn't exactly planned to build something this in-depth when I started out, but my original plan was to generate animator controllers via editor scripts, and that just came unstuck really quickly. I realized that I wouldn't be able to hit the quality bar that I was looking for, and the animator controllers were just really quickly getting out of hand. So with that, I decided to dig into Unity's Playables API and see if I could roll something better. And what you're looking at now is the result of what's evolved so far from that work. Now I should point out that this is not finished. Still needs a lot of polish. The editor tooling needs improving, and it's also missing some features that will come online as AI gets nearer to testing. And I understand some of the requirements a bit better. But anyway, I had essentially 5 main objectives when I set out building this. First up, importantly, is creating fluid-looking animations with it. I just found that working with animator controllers, I was getting this really kind of stop-start effect as I was switching between different animation states. And you can mitigate that slightly with messing with the different blend timings and things like that. But it was just really hard to do that and to maintain a sensible structure to your animator controllers and actually understand everything that was going on, especially as you were working with different animation sets that might or might not have different animation clips built in for the different things like stop starts or turns and things like that. Also, for the fluidity of the animation, I really wanted to look at better blending of the upper body and lower body animations or separate animations, and having some kind of like aiming and IK built in that was just more in depth than what I currently have with Neo's full body system. Next objective was to make sure that this was easy to use. It's a frequent bit of feedback when it comes to either the full body system or creating weapons for NeoFPS, that animator controllers are just a bit of a pain for everybody to deal with. They're fine for very simple use cases, but when you're managing transitions and interrupts, it can get really complicated really fast and very error prone. And it can be really hard and counterintuitive to track down why things like interrupts are getting out of sync and stuff like that. And it just quickly spirals and just becomes unmanageable. Next up, scalability. I really wanted to make sure that the system here will be able to work with different animation sets. Currently, what you're seeing here is using Kobold's movement and rifle anim sets. They're just quite thorough sets that I'm used to. They are actually, I think, at the moment deprecated from the store, and he's planning on bringing them back once he's fixed his character controller that demos them. But this system should be able to work with any animation set, really. And if you have a set or a number of sets that work together with all the different stop starts, turn in place, turn while moving, all these different kind of animations built in, then you can take full advantage of those. But if you don't have them, or if you only have some subset of them, the system scales really nicely to that and doesn't get out of hand. Next up, flexibility. One of the major problems with building characters around animator controllers is that you need to know all of the animations in advance that the character's going to be able to do. You can get around that to some extent with animator controller overrides, but they are a massive pain in the ass. And you still need to know the structure of the animators to do that. So for example, if you have a weapon that has a simple reload animation, or if you have one that has multiple reload animations or reloads that loop and things like that, you need to build all of those different kind of layouts and flows into your animator controller, and then maybe override the clips based on the weapon you have selected. It's not flexible, and it's really not easy to expand it later on without then having to go back and mess around with something that you haven't worked on in ages. So this new system aims to completely get around that and make it essentially decouple different elements of interaction, weapons, and locomotion from each other, so that you can work on them in isolation and just add what you need as you need it. And then the final objective essentially is just to create a system that is performant enough. We're not talking like dots level of performance here. This isn't ridiculous. But my goal is to have, say, 50 AI active alongside NeoFPS's character and all of Neo's systems across a range of different computers at 60 FPS, as a minimum, that is. I'm targeting standalone for this, not mobile, so this isn't like heavily optimized for mobile AI. And currently what you're looking at here is not being heavily optimized or anything like that. The saying is don't optimize early. It's not a good thing to do. You tie yourself into a corner. That will come later on, but already situation's pretty good. So we'll take a look at that a little bit later on. So anyway, that's enough just talking about what I was aiming for when I made this. Let's have a look at how you actually use it and how you set it up. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a very kind of basic third-person character controller. This is not a promise that this is going to be a third-person character controller that comes with NeoFPS or anything like that. I'm purely doing this to demo the character animation systems because the AI decision-making and maneuvering and things like that is not at a high enough level to achieve what was after here for this demo. It would be very cool to create a third-person version of NeoFPS. I don't know what form that would take, if it would be a separate asset, an extension, or something that shipped with NeoFPS. And also, I don't know whether these features are going to come across to the modular firearm systems and the different weapons, or the full body system in NeoFPS as well, for 1.2 that is. One of the things with 1.2 is I don't want to make major changes to the systems that's going to break people's projects in a big way. But there is a discussion to be had with the community about how much of this you get hold of and at what point once the AI is ready for testing, essentially. But yeah, so everything that you see on the root here of this character is essentially just for me to test or for me to build this system with. The AI inventory is something that's very early days and will be expanded upon. This simply replaces what you have as a first-person character in NeoFPS. But if we look at the character model itself here, then this is the meat of what we see, of what we were working with there. So you have the animated component, quite standard. There is no runtime animated controller attached. This system can use animated controllers, and in fact, what we're looking at here uses them for weapons, but it doesn't use any animated controllers for the locomotion. We'll have a look at how that works in a second. But yeah, essentially we've got root motion is handled by script here, so that's the character animation controller. And we've got the avatar and whatnot. Character animation controller, the footsteps section here, this is entirely debug. Disable actions is debug. This is just for me for testing. But the profile, this character animation profile is how you set up your character animations. So this is an asset in the project. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. Below that, we have character IK system. A good chunk of this is subject to change in how it's laid out. There is a lot of polish that needs to be done on things like blending between different targets. But one of the things that will stick around is this concept of sockets on your character. So we have right hand, left hand, right shoulder, left shoulder. So these are different places that the weapon will connect to. For example, a rifle will connect to the right hand when you're moving it around, but when you're bracing it and aiming, it will connect to the right shoulder. And then you can pick and choose on your actual weapons themselves how that works. We have various curves for the speed and the kind of extent of rotation of the different parts of the body. These might change, but you can see the effect that they have as we're looking at it. And then we have a character IK recoil system. So this kind of replaces the spring recoil and spring effects that you see in first-person weapons with a system that kind of works based on this IK system. And so as you shoot, the shoulder and the head and things move to recoil. So if we look at the animation profile for the character here, then this is how all of the actual movement of the character is handled, and a few different elements of setup as well. So it's got three sections. Locomotion blends. This is essentially your movement blend trees, kind of simplified from what you'll get with an animated controller. And then you have locomotion actions. So this is your one-shots, like your kind of turn in place and change speed and things like that. And then you have layers, which is your kind of upper body masking individual arms or parts of the body and things like that. The locomotion blends works on two kind of ideas. One of them is stances, and the other one is speed tiers. So each stance, for example, here we have standing unarmed and standing armed. If we have a look at the idle animation here, so we have a standard idle for unarmed. And there, let's find it again. There we go. So if we go for standing armed, we have rifle idle. So the key thing here is that this stance has a pose where the shoulders are forward, which is much easier to use with different weapon animation setups. But if we go back to the profile again, then each of these stances has a few settings, like we can decide whether you track footsteps in this stance. Right foot normalize is the point in the movement animations where the right foot first hits the ground. This might be subject to change where exactly the setting is, whether it needs to be moved into the individual blend trees here, or whether it's okay to be here. And then we have things like an idle turn rate. So this is the speed that you can turn on the spot when you're not moving. For a character with their feet planted on the ground, that's going to be 0. But if you were building, say, a character that hovers, you might want to turn that up there. And then a few different blend settings. And then below that, we have the different directional blends. So for example, walking and running. So each of these is a kind of blend tree. So we have blend in and out, the turn rate for this actual speed tier. And then move speed multiplier is a multiplier that's applied to the root motion output of the character animation. And then to add animations to this, you essentially just drag and drop them in here, and it will populate this list, set up the movement angle. So this did things like strafing and walking backwards and so on. And then the speed as well. And if you drag an animation in here that kind of doesn't fit within the criteria it's expecting, then you'll get an error and it will be like, you can't use this here. So yeah, here we have walk and run. In standing armed, we have walk and run as well. So like the clips are run backward loop, run forward loop, and so on. And crouching, yeah, we just have a crouch walk here. You could also have stances for things like injured or falling and so on and so forth. And then you would switch between them via some kind of API. The third-person controller does a very simple job of that, and the AI will as well. But you'll have a bit of flexibility there. And that is the very basics of movement. And locomotion actions are those one-shots that let us do things like turning in place. Now, when I was originally setting up the character animator controllers, one thing that I found was that based on the animation set that you're using, that scalability that I was talking about earlier, the logic behind having, say, animations that start on one foot or the other, or you have turn left and turn right 45, 90 degrees, or you don't have some combination of those, the logic for checking like do and don't, null handling and so forth, was absolutely insane. So instead, what I've switched to is what's called a utility AI. It's a very simple system that scores each of these actions as you're moving based on some metrics like what's my current movement direction, what's my target movement direction, what direction am I facing, what's my speed, and so on and so forth. And then once actions have crossed a certain threshold, the highest scoring action will be played. Now, you don't need any of these. So, for example, if we were to look in the inspector and actually go back to the character in the scene, here we are, then I've got this little debugging thing here, which is called disable actions, which essentially completely deactivates all of those. So here, as we move around, we are just looking at the blend trees. So we've got walking, all the different directions. Then we've got running. We can change different stance and it'll blend between them, just directly kind of interpolate between the different stance animations. And if I pull out a weapon, then it'll blend into that one, and we've still got all of these. Things like turning around, like the IK system does its job, but there's nothing steering besides the actual movement. So if you remember, I said you can have a turn rate for idle, so we could have it so it would turn in this situation, but generally you're going to want to do it while you're moving to kind of mask that kind of rotation. So yeah. However, with the actions re-enabled, one thing that we can do is we can look at this character debugger here. So this actually shows a few stats like your aim direction and so forth and speed. But it also gives you the scoring for the different animation actions attached to this character. So you can see that just fired up the walk forward start. If I then run and let go, that will fire off the run forward stop. Just so happened that that was left foot was closest to the ground. So that's the animation that it picked there. And then we've got things like if I turn to the left, for example, you can see the score rising on that turn loop. And the further we turn around, eventually it triggers it off. And so forth. If we spin, and then we'll get different ones triggering as we go. Yeah, so that's the locomotion actions as well. Let me just go back to the profile and look at some of those. So the individual settings here for what scores are done, some of these are going to change. I want to make this more intuitive. It's not too bad at the moment. So, for example, certain things like what stance this action's valid for is quite simple. The blend times, things like that. Attack and release is a simple envelope like you might get in music production for like hitting a note on a keyboard. An attack of 0 means that the action will instantly fire if the score is met, whereas a longer attack means that it kind of fades in and the score rises over time as long as the conditions are still met. So this lets you do things like, for example, have a very high attack on a 180 turn and lower attack and slower attacks on 90-degree turns, just to make sure that you don't accidentally end up turning 90 degrees twice instead of 180 when you've got more appropriate animations, or things like that. So yeah, a lot of these will change. If you want to add your own locomotion actions to this, you just click down here, pick one of the available ones, and then drag and drop your animation clip in here. With autofill actions switched on, it will try and populate what it can from the root motion here, and then you can just tweak the settings later. So we've got things like turn in place for when you're just looking side to side but still stationary. Turn while moving are things like that 180 when you look behind you. We've got change of stance, stationary, so yeah, you're standing and crouching. So that has like an animation when we're doing it like that. Whereas if we're walking, then it just interpolates because we don't have an animation that scores well while moving. And yeah, that's that. Layers. This one's auto-populated. You just need to add a mask for it. So this is the upper body. But you can add multiple layers. You can set them as additive, just like you would in an animator controller. And you can also attach animator controllers to these. But in this case, for example, with the upper body, the weapon's going to do that for us. So yeah, that's that. Let's have a quick look at some other aspects as well. So we have, when I was talking about the flexibility, things like adding different interactions to your scene. What we have over here is like a little trigger zone with a very simple script added to it, and this just has a one-shot animation attached. So this animation is just a very simple one. It's full body, but I've got this script set up to do on the upper body as well. So if we were to quickly run over there and then run over that trigger zone, you'll see the upper body triggered that animation while the lower body carried on as normal. And that will apply to any kind of movement as well, so we can quite happily just reverse and strafe into that. Yeah, if you happen to have a gun drawn, then this will force you to put it away, play the animation, and then pull it back out again. So there is a bit of glitchiness there. There's a little bit of polishing needs doing to the blends and things like that. But it's a very kind of scalable system. It doesn't have to just be one-shots as well. There is a full kind of sequences system that lets you do things like add logic in there. So you could have a start, a loop until a certain kind of criteria is met within the scene. Or to interact with objects, you can have branching kind of logic between the animations. And it will just kind of like blend that into your character. And you can have it full body, or you can have it as part of the body and things like that. My aim is to have an IK system set up with that so that you can do things like reach to objects in the scene with fixed animation points. And then the character will kind of step into the right location, play the synced animation, and the IK points will make sure that you're touching in the right place. We're not talking like full-on hand interaction like you get with some of the VR systems. It's much simpler than that. It's more kind of like an offset based on the animation. But yeah. The other aspect to the flexibility is the firearms. So let's just get these out of the way and have a look at one of the guns. So this right here is essentially a standard NeoFPS firearm. This is modular firearm just like you would use on a first-person weapon. A number of these errors here are because there's no animator actually attached to this. I'll tidy this up for 1.2 because this is kind of like a new valid workflow that kind of wasn't valid before. But yeah, the main differences between this and an original NeoFPS firearm would be that we don't have the kind of spring animation systems in here. Instead, we've just got the render geo directly below the root. And we have these anchor points. As I was talking about with the character setup and the character IK system, these are the two anchor points that are relevant for the rifles. The other differences are that a few modules aren't really relevant for AI. For example, we don't have an aimer module here because we're not moving a camera around. I mean, we kind of are for the demo here, but for an AI, you wouldn't be. You could use the anim-only aimer, which just sends animator parameters to the animator controller that this is aware of. So you could use that to trigger like different animations for the weapon as the AI is holding it. But otherwise, yeah. Recoil system as well. We have this new character IK recoil module, which replaces the kind of spring-based ones that we use otherwise. Also, we don't have a wieldable and we don't have an input module. Instead, replacing those, we have this AI wieldable. So this handles which animation anchor. So the animation anchor is the one that kind of your gun is attached to during an animation. And the braced anchor is the one that's optional one that it's attached to when you're aiming. So you can pick which transform to use that and which anchor on the character you want to kind of attach those to. A number of the other elements here are subject to change. But yeah, it's a relatively simple system. What else is there? Character IK recoil module. So this is very similar to the setup for the spring-based recoils, just with some slightly different settings, and it's not got the division between aimed and hipfire. And then the other thing to look at for the weapons would be the animator controller. So this is the one place that I'm using animator controllers for this demo. Like I was saying, the modular firearm systems in NeoFPS kind of rely on animator controllers. So in order for me to remove that requirement and actually adopt the same system that the characters are using here would be a pretty major rewrite. That's very doable. I would love to do that. It's just quite a major change, so it would break people's projects. I don't think there's a nice way for me to allow for both systems to coexist and to upgrade them without just creating a bit of a mess, basically. But this is a relatively simple animator controller. We've got the standard NeoFPS stuff. We've got equip and holster, shoot, an idle pose, and a reload. And that's essentially it. You could have more in here, like the shotgun, for example, could have its kind of start, loop, and then end for the reload. Or you could have all kinds of things in here. The main point behind this is that we have an animator controller for the rifle, which is here, and we have another very similar but actually, different animations for the pistol. So these are using full body animations, as you can see here, for the idle or for the shoot. Where are we? Boom. Yep, so it's as simple as that. And then when we actually play the game, these two animator controllers are essentially assimilated into the character animation system. So as required, as they're added to your character, and then we flip between them as needed for the actual animations on the weapons. So the modular firearm system talks to the character's animator and sends it the animation parameters, and that assimilated animator controller is then just acting as it normally would, which is a really cool system, I think, because it gives you complete flexibility. Like the character doesn't in any way need to know about the animation setup for the firearms. If you introduce a new firearm, like months down the line, that has completely different animation requirements, that's totally fine. It will just be, you add it to the character's inventory, it will be assimilated in, and it will be completely accessible to use. Like I say, I'd love to extend this to use like the same kind of API-based system that I've got for the character animation here, mean that you're not working with animator controllers, but just directly placing the clips in the firearm modules and so on. But that might be something that comes a little bit later on. Anyway, is there another element to this? I suppose there probably is. Oh yeah, the handoff sets. So I actually haven't looked at these in a little bit. So this is the assault rifle. What's the best way for me to disable the hierarchy? Don't want you. Character. Is it this one? Disable the camera. Is that going to do anything? Okay, yeah, that'll let me go to scene view. There we go. So if we were to look at now the handoff sets, hello, there we go. Then you have various things here that let you reposition hands, rotate them, and so forth. So this kind of essentially adapts the full body animation to your new weapon. So what essentially is happening here is the character is in its unmodified pose. It's getting the hand positions relative to the gun, which is anchored to this hand here. And then it's applying IK to the spine and the weapon and the head and all these things to move those around. And then it's reapplying hand IK to position the hands back on the gun with these offsets. So it's quite a flexible system, really, and quite simple to work with. And then if we actually look at the gun itself, where are you at? Wheeled balls, assault rifle. Look down here at the IK. So we have these different animation offsets here. So we can like tweak the positions on these as well. Or more importantly, shoulder, because we are braced here. So you can see that kind of moves the gun around with the character. So yeah, there's that. So the only other thing to really look at here is just a quick bit of fun, is I have this little performance test folder here, and this has 100 odd characters in it. These are all the same character. As you can see, the only difference is they have this camera thing disabled, so the input is basically using the aim from my one character here. In fact, actually, made a bit of a mistake there. Let me deselect. Having the inspector open kind of really screws performance. And here you can see we are running currently on my machine at 145, 120, 140 frames a second. And all of the characters are reacting based on this IK point here. So if I look over there, then you'll see more and more of them start to turn to face the different IK point. You can even pull out the guns. get everybody shooting at once, and so forth. Now that does kind of mess with frame rate quite a bit because you've got, what, 101 odd raycasts and whatever else going on there as we're shooting. But yeah, it's good stuff. So I think with the different AI brain, that's definitely going to affect performance, but then I will be doing an optimization pass later on as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. You found it interesting and exciting. I am very excited to see where this goes, how this kind of expands out into the AI as I add more and more of the kind of behavior-based stuff to it, and also potentially as I bring the systems like this into more parts of NeoFPS for 1.2 and beyond. But anyway, I've talked your ear off for long enough. Enjoy, everyone. I will see you on the Discord maybe. Otherwise, cool. Have a good one. Cheers.